Okay, so I'm going to start here by making a new drawing, just using the 2D template. One of the things we're going to do today, by the way, is I'm going to show you how to create your own template where you can load up like all of the things that you want to make sure show up in all of your drawings, and then you don't have to like do that all the time. Okay, so we're going to do that today. And in the syllabus, I just said we're going to learn about editing and creating text, which, yes, we're going to do that, but it's a little bit larger than that. It's really sort of about, because text is really about, a text is one of the ways you organize the information to help it make more sense. And there's other elements that are involved there. I think maybe next year I'll call this something different, because as I sat down to try to figure out what today was about, I realized it's more than just text. But let's talk about text for a moment, okay? So there's basically two forms of text in AutoCAD. There is single-line text and multi-line text. Most of the time, you're going to be just using the single-line text, okay? There's very rare occasions where a multi-line would be. Let me show you the difference. So if you just type text, or you can click on this big A here. That's the multi-line text. The single-line text is just text, which would be this one with the line underneath of it. But if you just type text, it says specify the start point of the text. So just click anywhere. And it'll say specify the height. And you can do that with your mouse, or you can type in a value. For example, I could just say 2. And then rotation angle of the text. That would be if you wanted it to be vertical or something, but I'm just going to keep that as 0. And then you can start typing. So, and generally speaking, when we are doing, when we draft, best practice is to keep things in all caps. Okay, that goes back to the days of hand drafting, but generally speaking, stick to all caps for most things, and be very careful about when you start using lowercase letters. thing you got to do is get the justification right. And the justification for this ideally would be middle center. Let me show you what that means. If I set this to middle center, okay, it gets all weird on me. But notice that I now have two handles on it. So this one on the corner, that's where the text begins. But the handle in the center that is kind of the origin of where the text is going to grow out from. Okay? And you can actually, if you go over to your object snaps and right-click on object snap, you can turn on, let's see, if you turn on insertion point, center, and midpoint, make sure that all those are on. Then what you can do now is, if I want to move this text, I can set move. And look, I can snap. I now get a snap node right in the center there, which is cool. So if I click on that, now I can move this and I can track it. So I can track it from midpoint of the bottom of this line to midpoint of the side of that. So if I go midpoint.
What are you changing justification?
Say again?
Are you doing the justification changes with the command at the beginning, or just right on the side?
So I'm just, once there's a way to do this a little bit differently, but for now I'm clicking on it here, and then I go over to properties, and I just say justify middle center. Okay? So one of the ways that I can get this, because I want this to be centered both, horizontally and vertically inside of this thing, and there's a little cheat that you're going to do to fix that, and you're going to draw an extra line that you don't need for a moment. Okay? So I'm going to draw a line, and I'm going to draw it from here to there. Okay? That way, and you'll see what that's for. You can't even see the line. It's like, because it's right on top of another line. Okay? So I'll do it again. So I'm going to draw a line from the top right corner to the edge of that title block line, right there. It'll be a dummy line, and I'm only drawing it so I can get myself a midpoint inside of that tiny box. So watch what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to take this text, I'm going to select it, and move it, and I'm going to snap to this mid-insertion point. Then watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to track from that midpoint and that midpoint. Bam! Now it is perfectly in the center. Okay, let me do that again. It's out here in no man's land, right? So now I'm going to hit M for move. I'm going to select this, snap to that insertion point, and then I'm going to object snap track from the two midpoints. And now that I've done that, I can go ahead and delete my dummy line. Don't need that anymore. Now, because I have this set to justification of mid-center, watch what happens if I want to edit this. So let's say, so this is my symbol, and I'm going to make a copy of it so that I can use it in my drawing. So here's my copy down here, and now I want to change this label. Watch what happens. If I just double-click on that, and I can type mixing console, see how it stays centered? Oops. I don't have to reposition it. However, if I had not done that justification correctly, so if I had this set to just left, okay, then it gets all messed up. And I could ultimately get this centered, right? But then if I then try to change it, now it's a little off. See? The spaces here on this side are different than the space on this side. Okay? So getting that justification right is super important. So I'll give you another example. So now what I want to do is, if we look at in the USITT diagrams, you also would have a make and model label up here, right? Well, that would ideally be a center justification as well. I'm just going to move that, copy that same thing, put it up here. And in this case, well, that's not super important, but so we can say this will be make/model. But then we also want input and output labels down here, right? Well, those are going to want to be quite a bit smaller. Yeah? And the height of this text at the moment is 0.15. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new text. And I'm just going to set it down here at this bottom corner. Specify height. Let's see. Let's try 0.05. No, 0.005. Let's see how tall that is. I'll just type input. That looks about right, actually. I might want to go a little bit larger on that. So what if I set it to 0.1? Yeah, I like 0.1 better. Don't you? Okay. Now, so here's the thing. If I move that and get it positioned just right, if I ever want to change what that says, I want to make sure that it's aligned correctly. So our justification in this case, I want to be top left. That way, if I change it, it stays stuck up in that top corner. Okay? And notice when I change that justification, it popped down a little bit. So I need to move it back to the spot I want. Okay? Now, I also need an output label, right? So watch what happens. Easiest thing to do would be to copy that, or just mirror it, actually. I'll do a mirror off of these midpoints. Okay? And I do not want to erase the source objects. However, look what happens if I type output. Aww. Disappointment happens. It doesn't fit in the box. Why doesn't it fit in the box? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to change my justification here, don't I? So I want to justify to top right. And now I just have to kind of move it over a little bit. And we're in business. And now I can change it all I want. So I can say matrix, for example. And it stays in the right spot. Okay? Okay, but I also want the actual numbers. And I can just use this same thing. And what I'm going to do, just to kind of keep things nice and neat, is I'm going to try to use the same spacing of my little title area. So I'm going to copy that input label, but I'm going to displace it using those 2 points. See that? That's super helpful. So in this case, though, I want this spacing, or this justification, to be middle left. Why? Because then I can line up the middle of that label with the line that's going to connect to it. Otherwise, so I've got something to snap to. Okay? And I'll show you what that means. So if I get a line now, and I want to draw a line into that, watch what happens. Look, I can snap to that midpoint, and I can object track off of that. Now that line is perfectly lined up with the middle of that text because I did middle left justification. And then I can just copy it. So I'll copy, and I'll just go, I'll use this spacing again. And this will be a 1. This will be a 2. we're good to go. And then, of course, I could just mirror these things. So take those, mirror them over. Oops, sorry. Clicked the wrong thing. But I want to change this justification, because when you mirror, it doesn't change the justification of the label. Okay? So I want to say this will be now middle right, yeah? And this one will be middle right. And then I'm going to have to move them. Okay? There you go. And then as you change these, like this could be omni 2. See how it grows out from the right place. Yeah? Everybody with me so far? Haven't left anybody in the dust? Okay. Well, what happens if you do all this work and you make a symbol like this, and then you make 3,000 copies of it into the system diagram that I'm going to make you draw this week. And then I look at it and say, I don't think that font is really the right font to use for this thing. Yeah, that's going to take you a really long time to go through and change every single text object in this drawing that has 1,000 objects in it. Okay? That's going to be really annoying, and you're not going to be happy with me. So I wonder if there's a better way.
There's gotta be a better way.
Jason, is there a better way of doing this? Yes, I'm glad you asked. There is a better way of doing this. And it's called text styles. Okay? So I'm actually not sure what it is just text style. Oh, no. I don't actually know what the command line is to pull that up. But if you go to Format and select Text Style, you'll get this window. The idea behind text style is you can define different ways that text will show up in your drawing. So each style then gets applied to text objects, and then because that style, all that styling with the font and size and all that kind of stuff, because that's linked to a specific style, you can just go and change that style in this window, and all of the objects that link to that style will update automatically. Wouldn't that be nice? That would be amazing. So the only way this works, however, is if you set up your text styles ahead of time before you start drawing. Okay? Because if you start drawing and then you say, oh, I want to do text styles, like I'm doing right now, you then got to go through all of your text and update the text styles, which is annoying. So do your text styles first. So what you want to do is set up all your text styles and then save that into a drawing template, so that every time you make a new drawing, you use your template, which inherits your text styles, right? And then you don't have to create them. They're already all there. And then as you start drawing symbols, you just link them to the appropriate text styles before you start copying them. And then you can update and tweak your text all you want. So let's create a couple of text styles, shall we? Okay, so does anybody remember what the text height was of this larger label? Let's just take a look here. It was 0.15. Look at that, you smart person. Okay. So I'm going to create a style that is, I'm going to call this my... So I'm envisioning basically 3 styles of text here. One that is like the little tiny labels, one that is kind of the general kind of equipment labels, and then maybe one that's a little bit larger that I would use to label sections of drawings or something. But we'll just create the two for now. So I'm going to do my, I'm just going to call it my sound mid. Or you could even use, you can just say middle, because you've got room. That's okay. Okay, so sound middle. And you got to pick a font. Okay, now, how many of you have ever taken any sort of typography classes or graphic design classes where they talk about typography? And maybe. Do you know the difference between a serif and a non-serif font?
2 years ago I would have. Can I call my dad?
No. Okay.
He will. Wait, yes, the serif is the thing, the blanky.
So let me.
It's the blanky. At the end where you got the serif, and then some of you gotta have the.
So let me pull up our font book here.
I know the words I'm saying.
So.
That's all that matters. Usually at the end, the bottom, like you know, at the S, how it has stuff.
Okay. This is an example of a serifed font. Okay, and the serifs are all these little sort of things that stick out, you know, these ornamental things. Okay, those are serifs. Okay, and so most fonts can be categorized as either serifed or they call it sans serif. As opposed, in sans, it means like the absence of or without serifs. So there are serif fonts and there are sans serif fonts. Okay. For example, here is one that says Gill Sans. Gill Sans means sans serif. So see, there's no serifs on it.
So what is the font sans serif based off of that? Like, what was the original?
It's a font.
I don't know.
It was birthed from a lack of serif.
Here is what's important in the context of what we do. Our text tends to end up being very small, okay? Because, you know, we're doing detailed drawings with lots of little labels, and the little labels end up being kind of small. Ideally, they're not smaller than 3/16 of an inch, which is what the USITT guidelines sort of say. So ideally, they would not be smaller than that, but that's pretty small. That's a really small little piece of text to look at on a piece of paper or on a screen. So the serifs look fancy and they look nice, but it's more difficult to read serifed fonts when they are small, okay? Because all those little extra ornaments just turn into kind of garbage when you shrink it down. So generally speaking, in CAD drawings, you kind of want to stick to sans serif fonts, okay? Fonts that don't have serifs in them. However, not all sans serif fonts are created equal, okay? That's why there are so many of them. So let's compare. Okay, so here's just a very simple Arial font, which is sans serif. Okay, look what happens when I go really small. I don't know if you can see that, but the really thick one kind of gets harder to read than the smaller one, okay? Because the really thick lines tend to kind of glom together when you get small, okay? And so ideally, you want sans serif fonts that don't use very thick lines, okay? That way, when they get smaller, those lines don't start to blur together when you shrink it down, which has a tendency to happen. So what I see a lot of people do, a lot of students do, is, and I understand it, I get it, like these are not the most creative and artistic drawings you will ever create in your life, and you know there's not a lot of art in a schematic diagram. Like, I get that and I understand that, and you're going to be really tempted to like figure out, okay, how can I like put my own spin on this? And the easy way, or the easy conclusion a lot of people come to is, oh, I'm going to like choose my own fonts. That is like, oh, my fonts will look like this. And so I get that, but I'm just trying to give you a little bit of guidance when you go down that rabbit hole, and you're like, I'm going to make my fonts look different from everyone else's, and then they'll know it's my drawing. It's like, okay, get it, fine, knock yourself out, but stay away from serifs and stay away from thick sans serifs, okay? So you're looking for thin sans serif fonts. Well, Jason, how do I know which ones are the thin sans serif fonts without having to dig through, thousands of fonts on my computer? How do I not like waste a million hours doing that? Well, I'm glad you asked, because in fact, AutoCAD ships with its own fonts that are specifically designed to work well in these kind of drawings. So if we go back to AutoCAD here, yeah, so you see how I've got two different kinds of fonts in here? I've got these ones that say TT, that stands for True Type. Those are the fonts that are generally found on your computer. That's all the fancy stuff. AutoCAD has its own font type, which is this SHX. So all these ones that are SHX are ones that you are probably pretty safe to use for most drawings in AutoCAD. They even have one that mimics the old hand lettering drafting style, which is kind of cool. The one that I really like, because I just think it looks nice, is, oops, sorry. Make sure I don't steer you wrong here. I'll give you the right one. So I like the one that's called Romans. Okay? Now normally Roman is a serifed font in the true type world, okay? Because yes, the Romans liked serifs, okay? But if you look, this is what it looks like. So there's no serifs on this, even though it's called a Roman font, okay? So I like this one because it's nice and thin, and it looks right. It looks the same whether it's really big or really small, and there's nothing to like, confuse it or anything. But you don't have to use that one. I'm just saying that's the one I like. Okay, I'm not going to give you a hard time if you choose a different one, as long as the one that you choose functions in a similar way, so that it's clear, you can read it whether it's really big or really small, and it doesn't get confusing when you shrink it, okay? Because that is really problematic when you start shrinking it down, and it makes it really hard to read, okay? So I like Romans. So, but there's different, like, see, here's one that actually has some serifs, but they're nice and thin. You see how they don't like have a lot of curvy lines to them, so they don't have as many problems when you shrink them down. So anyway, I like this one, so that's what I'm going to use. And you can actually specify in the text style what the height will be. So anything that uses this text style will automatically get this height, okay?
But what then, like if you're using it for everything in this block, and then you go in and you're like, hey, I hate that font, change it, then would it then change everything in that block, even though the 0.15 and the 0.1 are the same?
So you would have two different text styles.
For the different heights?
Yeah,
Okay.
right. So I'm going to say this one was 0.15, right?
Yeah.
Is that yes?
Tall one was 0.15.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll hit apply on that, and I'm going to make another style that's called sound small. Also Romans. text height in this case will be 0.1. Okay? So now I'm going to start over with this text. We're going to do this again. Whoops. Didn't want to lose that line. Okay. So here's my little block that I've made here. And I'm going to make my text. And I'm just going to click anywhere, rotation, and I'll say equipment type. Okay? And then before I do anything with this, I'm just going to make sure that it's using the right style. So right now it's using sound small because that's the last one that I was goofing around with in the text style window. But I can just flip this and say, oh, this will be sound middle, and see how it automatically grew up to a larger size?
So when you do text and it's like, what's your height, what's your rotation, can you just put in arbitrary numbers or skip that step? And
Well, if you have a text style defined and one of yours that has a fixed height was the last one you touched in the text style window, then it will assume that that's the one you want to work with, and it won't ask you those questions.
Gotcha.
Right? That's why it didn't ask me. The only thing it asked me was, what's the rotation angle? And the reason it asked me for the rotation angle is because I didn't specify that in my text style. Okay? Which I could. If I didn't want to have to be asked that question every time, I could just go ahead and specify that, and then it wouldn't bother me. But I don't really care, so I'm not going to do that right now. So while I've got that style up now, I need to just change that justification to be middle center. And now I can, I'm going to make my dummy line again just so I can get this right. And now I can move this. I'll grab onto that little mid insertion point, and I'll track, object snap track from those 2 points. Boom, perfectly centered. Yay! Yes. Okay. So, oh, and the other thing about those SHX fonts from AutoCAD, the other thing that kind of makes them special is it's possible. So you don't see this so much anymore, but it used to be that if you wanted to print in AutoCAD on really large pieces of paper, you had to use what's called a plotter. And a plotter was a type of printer that actually had a pen in it. It was a robotic arm attached to a pen. And it would go and actually draw this thing out for you. Okay? And so the fonts that come with AutoCAD are specifically designed to be possible to draw correctly using a pen-style plotter. Okay? Because doing a really thick, serif like Times New Roman font with a robotic arm pen plotter would be really annoying. Trying to fill in all those, spaces and everything would be really frustrating. It wouldn't look very good. So that's why if you look at even the serif fonts in the AutoCAD library, you notice that you can see the individual lines, and that's why. It's because it started. And we used to have we used to have some of those pen-style plotters. We don't have them so much anymore. So it's less of an issue. You can use the true type fonts in AutoCAD, and they will now plot just fine because we're using plotters that don't require pens so much anymore. But it's still just generally good practice to stick to the AutoCAD ones, particularly out there in the big wide world. Like if you're working for an architectural firm and stuff, and you're doing system drawings, it's good practice to use those just because they might be using those pen-style plotters. So most people just use those AutoCAD fonts. Okay, so now I'll take this, I'll copy this, and put this above. Now notice I'm just using that spacing again to put it up there. And this will be make/model. And now I'm going to do another bit of text for my input labels. Specify start point, no angle, and we'll call this input. And it's using the sound small, so I just need to set its justification to top left. And And then I can move it. And a kind of a good idea, just to kind of keep this going, is I snapped it to that corner, and now I'm going to move it. And just so I can keep it consistent, I'm going to move, let's see. If I can find a consistent number that I know I can hit every time, I'm going to say 0.025. 0.025 that way, and then I'll take it and I'll move it down by that same amount. Right, and then I can just remember that number, 0.0. That way, when I position on the other side, I can keep them even. So I can now mirror this one. And I'm going to change my justification to top right. I will move it and snap it to that corner. And then I will move it again each direction by 0.025. Okay. And now I can change this to output, and it will grow out the right direction. And now I want to just make my little label, so I'll do a copy off of here. And I'll snap it to that spot. And in this case, I want middle left justification. And I will move it 0.025 over that way. And we'll call this number 1. And then I can copy this down to there, call that number 2. All right? And maybe I'll just mirror those for fun. Oops. Keep hitting that stupid button. And we will call these middle right justification. And then we can move them, snap them there, and then track them back, 0.025. That one didn't seem to go right. That's better. Okay. Make sense? There we go. I've got my symbol now. Now I can copy this as many times as I want and make my drawing. Everybody with me so far?
Yes.
Okay. Now, another thing you want to do is we have not yet talked about layers. Anybody ever worked with something like Photoshop or something where you deal with layers? So AutoCAD has a similar feature. What's the advantage of putting things in layers? Keeps them yeah, so in like something like Photoshop, it allows you to take it out later or do an effect on it separately. And the same thing is true in AutoCAD, but the main thing that's helpful if you can put things in layers is it helps you manage colors and line weights, line types, and things in a way that, again, let's say you do this whole drawing and you cut, so you have this whole symbol and you copy that 1,000 times into a really complicated drawing, and then I come and tell you, I say, hey, you know what? I would really like to see the outside outline of this thing should be a slightly thicker line weight, so I know that that's different from a signal wire, right? So that line looks different on the drawing, a little thicker. Well, you could go and change all 1,000 of those little boxes to a different line weight, and it would take you a really long time. But if you ahead of time drew this in a way that that was on a separate layer, then you could just change the properties of the layer, and all of the lines that are drawn on that layer will change. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to create a few layers here. So over on the right, you should be able to open up this thing that says Show Layer List. Right now, we don't have a whole lot of layers. You can even drag this out to see them a little bit better. So we've just got layer 0 is the only one we have right now, yeah? You should just have a layer 0? Okay. So let's create a new layer. So you're going to click this little button on the bottom left of that layer area. It says New Layer. You see it? Click that. And let's call this one Sound Equipment. So this layer will contain all the lines that designate a piece of equipment. And you can set a color for that. I'll say that color will be green, maybe. Okay, and let me get rid of my dummy line here. So now what I'll do is I'm going to select my box, my equipment box there. And notice how in my layers list, this top little row, that tells you what layer that thing currently is on. Okay? It's currently on layer 0, because that's where I was drawing. But if I just hit that drop-down menu and select Sound Equipment, then it will move, and then I can escape to deselect. Now it moved that box onto that Sound Equipment layer, which means now I could tweak the properties of that layer, and I would be able to change the way that line behaves and shows up, even if I make 1,000 copies of this object. Okay? Now, I think I'd probably like another one for all of my connection wires. So all of my little lines that connect equipment together, I want that to be a different layer because I might want to treat all of those lines in similar ways. Okay? So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'll call this Sound Connection. And maybe that can be a magenta color. So I'm going to select my connection wires and move them to that new layer. And now they all turned magenta. Let's see what you're doing here.
So I have this selected.
Yep.
And the layers and sound equipment, and the color is green. Then it's still white.
Okay, so wait, click on the box again. And it isn't Sound Equipment.
Oh, colors by block.
Yeah, oh yeah, you changed that.
There we go.
Okay, so maybe I want another layer for my text. So I'm going to do like sound text mid for all of my middle-sized text. And maybe that would be whatever color you want. I'm going to say yellow, just because. And let me go ahead and select these two bits of text, and I'll move that to the mid layer. And then I can do another one for sound text small. And maybe that can be like this cyan color. By the way, if in fact, when you go to plot this stuff and start using colors in your plots, normally you'll plot most things in monochrome. But when you use color in an actual plot, I'm going to give you a hard time about your colors because I don't want you to just pick default colors, because like that yellow and this cyan and this magenta really don't look very good against a white piece of paper. So if you want, you can just select this, go to Select Color, and you have a ton of different colors here to choose from. So like you could do this one, this color number 121, which is a slightly lighter color. So in this case, I can go and select all of my small text and move it to that layer. Now, here's a deep philosophical question. what do I do with that line?
Which one? That one?
Yeah, the one I've got selected.
Would you put
What?
it in text because it's not a part of the block?
Well, so if I make it equipment, then when if I decide to change the line weight or the thickness of the box line, then that line gets thicker too, which it could potentially encroach on some of my text, right? So that would be the argument against doing it. But it's also not, technically speaking, text. But I don't know that I really want it changing with the line weight of the outside of the box. So I'm just going to put it, this is my preference, is I'll put it in with my middle text, just so that since it's so close to my text, I don't really want it to change thickness independently of the text. Okay, so I'll leave that there. Okay, there we go. We've sort of got something here. The only thing I may want to do is I don't really like how tight these two are up against the top of that, so I'm going to move them down ever so slightly. I think that looks a little bit better. Do you agree?
Yes.
Yes. And I actually think I want to move these back just a hair as well. There we go. That looks better. Okay. So I sort of got something now. Yeah? Now, here is, oh, hang on. Let me sync my drive here so we're going to do a cooking show experience here in a second here.
Oh, the one where you were like, yeah, I made this one before?
Yeah. So eventually, you might end up with something like this. Now, I don't need that text for now. So maybe you could just make all these symbols. So this is what I want you to do is don't copy the symbols from, you have the CAD file for the USIDT thing. I want you to draw your own with your own layers. See how I've made my own layers here? Create at least these symbols, okay? Which is the same symbols I had you create with just typing, the first week of class. And create the text styles that you would need to make all this work, and make sure all your text is linked to those styles. And there's one other thing you need to do, which is create a dimension style. Because this little label for the NL4, that uses a dimensioning tool, which we don't use a whole lot in sound, but dimensioning is used for like architectural drawings when you want to make an annotation for how large something is, the scale of it, like this is a 10-foot thing or whatever. So let me show you what that looks like. So I can get a dimension, and the command is just dim, and I could say from here to here, and then I get this little thingy. And then I can go in and just put whatever text I want in there. Like I could say NL4 after I delete this other thing. Okay? Now how did I make that work? Well, guess what? You have dimension styles as well. And so I just went in and modified my standard dimension style. So you go to standard, go here and set modify, and I just had to kind of tweak the arrow size and the text size so that it would fit that way and create because I want the text to show up in between the two lines, and because this is such a small space, by using the default, it would show up outside. It would like do a call out on that text, which I don't like the way that looks. So I had to just go in here and tweak the text height and the symbols and arrows on that. And in fact, if I wanted to be like super awesome, I could go in and apply my text style to that. and then it would be there. And then, ultimately I put this on a different layer. Put it there. Okay, and now you can get that cool little NL4 thingy to show up. Okay? So that's what I want you to do first, is draw all these things with the appropriate layers, with the appropriate text styles, and that dimension style you need to do the NL4 call out, and then save it as a template. Now, how do you save it as a template, Jason? I'm so glad you asked. Here's how. Yes, you could Command-Shift-S or just File, Save As. But notice this file format thingy. So right now it's AutoCAD Drawing, DWG. But you want to select DWT. All right? And then go ahead and save that anywhere you want. You can save it into the templates folder for your AutoCAD installation if you want. But you can also just put it in a folder for all your drawings. I'm going to put it on desktop for now. And it's going to ask me for measurements. It doesn't matter because this is not a scaled drawing, so you can just put whatever you want. But template description, I'm going to say system diagram template. Done. Okay, so now when I go to create a new drawing, it'll take you to this template thing, but you can just go to wherever your template is. Say, I want to do this one. And it's going to create a new empty drawing 2 with those symbols already there, with your layers already there, with your text styles already there. And now you don't have to create all those from scratch again. And now you can copy your own symbols around instead of using mine all the time. Okay? That way you don't have to do all that work every single time you want to create a drawing. Yeah? Makes sense? And you know what? If you find other elements that you want to have in your template, other symbols you want to have available, or other layers you want to create, or other things, you can do that and just resave your template. And then it'll be there, and you'll have all that stuff every time you create a drawing. So that is the first thing I want you to do, is create your template using at least these symbols, at a minimum, though you might find others to be useful, and you're welcome to add more if you'd like to. But I want you to at least do those ones. Then I want you to use your template to create a new drawing, and then I'm going to have you make a new system diagram, which is, let me show you. So you now have, if you go to modules on Canvas, there's this annotated system diagram assignment, which now, if you scroll down, here's the diagram. Very similar diagrams before. It's a little bit different. It's not quite as complicated. There's less stuff. It's a different console on this particular show. But I want you to create this diagram using your template and pay attention to what all the text says and actually fix all the labels so that the labels are correct. So if you just download this image, so save image to downloads, then you can get the full res of it. And now you can zoom in and look at what all this stuff says. So notice how I actually have, this is a sampler, it's an Akai 6000, matrix 1 out, aux 12, so on and so forth. So I want you to put all that in there. So all the text matters now. Okay? And turn that in before 10 o'clock next Wednesday. Yeah, before 10 o'clock. So I don't have to wait again to download it. So that's the second time. Okay, questions? All right, you have an hour to begin.
How to open that dimension window?
You go to, under Format, you go to Dimension Style. So under the Format menu up here, Dimension Style. You can also just type, I think it's dim, if you just type dim sty or dim style, it'll pop it up as well. Yeah.